Custer's boots gripped the ridge at 3,411 feet, his gaze fixed on the Sioux below. His men, outnumbered, trusted his boldness. The village seemed within reach, but unseen warriors closed in. In that fleeting moment, he bet everything on speed. The cost of that view was unthinkable. George Armstrong Custer, Lieutenant Colonel of the 7th Cavalry, led his men toward the Little Bighorn Valley on the 25th of June, 1876. His force, under 700 strong, moved through uneven terrain, hooves kicking up dry earth. Carbines rattled against saddles as the column pressed forward after days of tracking the Sioux and their allies. Custer's orders were to locate and engage the enemy, preventing their families from scattering into the hills. His goal was to trap the warriors, force a fight, and end the campaign with a single, sharp strike. Custer's decision to advance wasn't a simple order. It was a calculated risk, driven by necessity and ambition. He aimed to pin the Sioux in their village, knowing that if they dispersed, the campaign would stretch into months of chases across the plains. His scouts, Crow and Arikara, reported a large encampment ahead, but exact numbers remained unclear. The Sioux, under Sitting Bull and Crazy Horse, were a force Custer had never faced in open battle. Their reputation for swift, coordinated attacks weighed on his mind as he eyed the distant ridges. The cavalry's pace was relentless. Men gripped reins tightly, their mounts heaving after long marches. Custer rode at the head, his posture rigid, scanning the horizon for signs of movement. The valley's bluffs and ravines offered cover for an enemy that could strike without warning. His plan relied on hitting the Sioux before they could organize, using speed to offset the uncertainty of their numbers. If he delayed, the warriors might slip away, leaving him to face a drawn-out conflict that could cost his men and his standing. Custer's mind churned with the stakes. A victory here could secure his name in military history, but a misstep could unravel everything. He knew the Sioux weren't just fighters. They defended a way of life, rooted in these lands long before his boots touched the soil. Their village, sprawling somewhere beyond the next rise, held not only warriors but families, a fact that made them both vulnerable and fiercely determined. Custer's challenge was to outmaneuver them, to strike so quickly their response would falter. The terrain ahead shaped his approach. Steep bluffs flanked the valley, their slopes dotted with scrub and loose rock. Narrow ravines cut through the ground, perfect for ambushes. Custer's men felt the weight of unseen eyes tracking their advance. The Sioux were there, somewhere, waiting. Custer's scouts had spotted trails leading into the valley, but no clear count of warriors emerged. His force, though battle-hardened, was stretched thin after days of pursuit, their supplies dwindling. To maintain momentum, Custer split his command. He sent Major Marcus Reno with a battalion to strike the village's southern end, aiming to draw the Sioux into a defensive fight. Custer himself would lead the rest along the eastern bluffs, seeking a vantage to assess the enemy's movements. His plan demanded precision. Reno's attack would hold the Sioux in place, allowing Custer to flank and crush their resistance. But the split risked confusion, and the rough ground could slow his coordination. Custer's choice to press forward without pausing for a full scout reflected his reliance on speed. He believed a rapid assault would disrupt the Sioux before they could rally. Yet the valley's layout posed a constant threat. Its folds and dips could hide hundreds, even thousands of warriors. Custer's men gripped their Springfield carbines, their fingers brushing the triggers as they scanned the ridgelines. The silence was heavy, broken only by the creak of saddles and the crunch of boots on gravel. His ambition wasn't blind, but it was bold. Custer knew the Sioux could outnumber him, yet he trusted his cavalry's discipline and firepower to carry the day. The thought of the warriors slipping away, scattering into the Badlands, drove him to act. A prolonged campaign would drain his resources and invite scrutiny from his superiors. He needed a win, not just for the army but for himself, a chance to silence critics who questioned his reckless style. As the column neared the valley's edge, Custer's focus sharpened. He halted briefly, his eyes tracing the ground ahead. The bluffs offered a chance to observe, but lingering too long could cost him the initiative. He signaled his men to tighten their formation, preparing to move along the high ground. The Sioux village lay somewhere below, its size and strength still a mystery. Custer's pulse quickened as he weighed his next step, knowing each decision could tip the balance between triumph and disaster. The men behind him sensed the tension. They were loyal, but fatigue etched their faces. They trusted Custer's nerve, his ability to seize moments others shunned. Yet the valley's quiet unnerved them. No birds called, no wind stirred. It was as if the land itself held its breath. Custer's scouts rode back. There. Custer pressed his horse along the bluffs, his eyes scanning the little Bighorn Valley below. On the 25th of June, 1876, his 7th Cavalry, now split into battalions, moved toward the Sioux encampment. The ground beneath was uneven, rocky slopes and narrow ravines slowing their pace. Custer's mind locked onto the terrain, knowing it would shape the coming fight. Every ridge, every dip, could hide warriors or offer a vantage. His goal was to find the perfect spot to assess the Sioux's movements and direct his attack. The question of where Custer stood to observe the battlefield has sparked debate for decades. Historians, tacticians, and battlefield enthusiasts argue over key locations: Weir Point, Sharpshooters, Ridge, or the lesser-known elevation at 3,411 feet. Early accounts pointed to Weir Point, a high ridge offering a broad view, or Sharpshooters Ridge, closer to the village. But recent analysis casts doubt on both. The 3,411-foot marker, a steep rise overlooking the valley, aligns better with surviving testimony. Its position gave Custer a clear line of sight to the Sioux village and the chaos unfolding below. Lieutenant Carlo DeRudio, a survivor of the battle, claimed he saw Custer on a bluff roughly 1,000 yards from the fighting. His account, though, is questioned for its distance and clarity. DeRudio, caught in the fray with Major Reno's men, could barely make out details through the dust and smoke. Private Giovanni Martini, Custer's orderly, offered a sharper recollection. He described Custer pausing briefly on a high ridge, glassing the valley with binoculars, tracking the village's sprawl. Martini's testimony, despite scrutiny, remains a cornerstone for mapping Custer's movements. The 3,411-foot elevation stands out as the likely spot. Perched on a spine of rock, it offered Custer a commanding view of the Little Bighorn. From there, he could see the village's tipis stretching along the river, smoke rising from cooking fires. He likely spotted Major Reno's battalion engaging the Sioux to the south, their carbines flashing in the distance. The ridge also revealed the valley's challenges, deep coulees and jagged bluffs that could conceal hundreds of warriors. Custer's decision to pause here, if only for moments, was critical. Martini's account anchors this theory. He carried Custer's final message to Captain Benteen, scribbled near this elevation, a call for reinforcements to join the fight quickly. The note, handed off as Martini rode back, suggests Custer was still assessing the battlefield from 3,411 feet. He saw enough to know the village was vast, its warriors numerous, but not enough to grasp their full strength. The ridge gave him a glimpse of Reno's struggle, the Sioux warriors swarming like ants from the village's edge. The strategic value of 3,411 feet lay in its height and proximity. Unlike Weir Point, too distant to see details, or Sharpshooter's Ridge, too exposed to enemy fire, 3,411 offered balance. Custer could track his men's positions and the Sioux' response without losing time. His plan hinged on speed, but this pause showed a flicker of caution. He needed to confirm the village's layout, to see if his flanking maneuver could trap the Sioux before they scattered. Yet the view from 3,411 feet was incomplete. The valley's folds hid the true scale of the Sioux and Cheyenne forces. Custer likely saw Tepis and movement, but underestimated the warriors' numbers, possibly thousands, far outstripping his 600 men. The terrain played tricks. Ravines masked approaching riders, and the village's sprawl suggested it was less fortified than it was. His reliance on speed blinded him to the need for a fuller scout. He assumed his cavalry's firepower could overwhelm any resistance. Custer's mind raced as he studied the valley. His men, strung out along the bluffs, gripped their Springfield carbines, their eyes darting to every shadow. The Sioux were close. Hoofprints and broken branches marked their trails. Custer's scouts, riding ahead, signaled back with quick gestures, confirming the village's position. He knew the Sioux could counterattack swiftly, their bows and rifles ready. His decision to move forward, bypassing other vantage points like Weir Point, reflected his trust in momentum over caution. The 3,411-foot ridge became a pivot point. From here, Custer could have held back, waiting for Benteen's battalion to join him. Instead, he chose to advance, signaling his men to follow the bluffs towards Cedar Coulee. The terrain grew rougher, slowing their horses. Custer's focus narrowed: hit the village's northern flank, disrupt the Sioux, and support Reno's attack. But the ridge's view had misled him. The village wasn't scattered. It was a fortress of warriors, ready to defend their families. Martini's testimony, cross-referenced with the terrain, points to 3,411 as Custer's critical observation post. The message to Benteen, sent from this spot, was a plea for speed, underscoring Custer's belief that a quick strike could still win. But the valley's layout worked against him. The Sioux, alerted by Reno's attack, were already mobilizing. Their warriors, mounted and on foot, used the coulees to close in, unseen. Custer's pause at 3,411 gave him a moment to plan, but it also exposed his miscalculation. From 3,411 feet, Custer saw the village's northern edge, Tepis clustered along the river. He likely spotted women and children moving, a sign the Sioux weren't fleeing. Reno's men, visible to the south, were faltering, their line buckling under Sioux pressure. Custer's binoculars swept the valley, searching for gaps to exploit. The ridge offered clarity but not truth. The Sioux's numbers, hidden in the ravines, were a threat he couldn't fully gauge. The decision to move from 3,411 feet was Custer's last chance to pivot. He could have regrouped, called Reno back, or waited for Benteen. Instead, he waved his men forward, their horses picking through the rocky ground. The Sioux, watching from below, tightened their grip. Custer's choice to press on, trusting his view from the ridge, set the stage for the chaos to come. The valley, with its hidden dangers, was about to swallow his command. As Custer descended from the ridge, the Sioux warriors stirred, their movements a prelude to the storm that would engulf the 7th Cavalry. Custer's 7th Cavalry descended from the bluffs into the Little Bighorn Valley on the 25th of June, 1876. His force, now split, aimed to crush the Sioux and Cheyenne before they could scatter. Custer's strategy banked on speed and surprise, trusting his men's Springfield carbines to outmatch the enemy's bows and rifles. But the valley's rugged terrain-steep ravines, rocky coulees, and hidden ridge turned his plan into a gamble. As he moved towards Cedar Coulee, the Sioux, led by Sitting Bull and Crazy Horse, were already stirring, their warriors mounting a defense fiercer than Custer anticipated. Custer's approach relied on overwhelming the village before its warriors could organize. After sending Major Marcus Reno to strike the southern end, Custer veered right, leading his battalion along the eastern bluffs. His focus was unrelenting: maintain momentum, flank the Sioux, and trap them against Reno's attack. But speed came at a cost. His men, strung out across the uneven ground, struggled to keep formation. Communication faltered as coolies blocked sightlines, leaving Custer's units vulnerable to missteps. Reno's attack, meant to pin the Sioux, crumbled quickly. His battalion charged the village's edge, carbines blazing, but met a wall of warriors. Sioux and Cheyenne fighters, armed with repeating rifles and bows, swarmed from the Taipis, forcing Reno's men to dismount and form a skirmish line. The line buckled under relentless pressure, and Reno ordered a retreat to the timber along the river. His withdrawal, chaotic and costly, left Custer's flank exposed. The Sioux, now alerted, turned their focus to Custer's advancing column. The valley's terrain hindered Custer's advance. Cedar Coulee, a narrow gash in the earth, slowed his horses, their hooves slipping on loose rock. Bluffs loomed overhead, offering cover for Sioux scouts tracking his every move. Custer's men gripped their reins, eyes darting to the ridgelines where shadows flickered. The element of surprise, critical to his plan, was gone. The Sioux, unified and resolute, weren't scattering as he'd hoped. Instead, they rallied, their war cries echoing across the valley. Custer's miscalculation was stark. He'd assumed the Sioux and Cheyenne would flee or fight in disarray, as other tribes had in past campaigns. But this village, sprawling along the Little Bighorn, was a stronghold of thousands, including hundreds of battle-hardened warriors. Their cohesion, forged by shared purpose, stunned Custer's command. Warriors poured from the camp, some on horseback, others weaving through the coulees, their movements swift and coordinated. The plan's success hinged on flawless execution. Custer expected Reno to hold the Sioux in place while Captain Frederick Bentine's battalion reinforced the assault. But Reno's retreat and Bentine's delay his men, bogged down miles away, shattered the coordination. Custer's runners, sent to urge Bentine forward, couldn't bridge the gap fast enough. The lack of clear orders left each battalion isolated, unaware of the other's positions. Custer's reliance on his subordinates' precision, without ensuring tight communication, proved fatal. As Custer neared Cedar Coulee's mouth, the Sioux struck. Warriors emerged from the ravines, arrows hissing through the air, rifles cracking. Custer's men returned fire, their carbines spitting lead, but the terrain favored the Sioux. Coulees provided cover for flanking maneuvers, allowing warriors to close in unseen. Custer's column, stretched thin, struggled to form a cohesive defense. Horses reared, men shouted orders, but the chaos grew as the Sioux tightened their grip. Lieutenant Carlo DeRudio, caught with Reno's retreating men, later claimed he saw Custer on a bluff observing the valley. His account, though distant, suggests Custer paused to assess the unraveling fight. Private Giovanni Martini, Custer's orderly, recalled Custer near Cedar Coulee, scanning the village before sending him with a desperate note to Bentine. "Come quick, big village." Martini's ride marked Custer's last attempt to rally support, but it was too late. The Sioux were already enveloping his position. Custer's decision to press forward, bypassing safer vantage points, limited his battlefield awareness. From Cedar Coulee, his view was obstructed by bluffs and dust, hiding the Sioux's full strength. Lieutenant Charles Varnum, with Reno's command, spotted Custer's Grey Horse troop moving along the bluffs, their mounts stark against the earth. The sighting confirmed Custer was still maneuvering, likely aiming to strike the village's northern flank. But the Sioux, using the terrain, outpaced him. The battle's tipping point came as Custer's men reached Custer Ridge. Here, they dismounted, forming a defensive line. Carbines roared in volleys, answered by the Sioux's relentless fire. Archaeological evidence spent cartridges and bullet scars on Custer Ridge and nearby Nye Cartwright Ridge shows a desperate stand. Custer's men, outnumbered, fought from shallow depressions, their horses picketed behind. Sioux warriors, crawling through the grass or charging on horseback, used the coulees to flank and isolate the troopers. Custer's tactics, rooted in aggressive momentum, backfired. His focus on speed left his men exposed, unable to regroup or retreat. The Sioux exploited every misstep, their attacks relentless. Warriors like Gall and Two Moons led charges that splintered Custer's line, cutting off squads and sowing panic. The cavalry's single-shot carbines couldn't match the Sioux's rapid-fire rifles or the deadly accuracy of their bows loosed from cover. Whether Custer attempted a retreat remains debated. Some accounts suggest he tried to fall back to higher ground, but the Sioux's encirclement was too tight. Volley fire, heard by Reno's men from afar, marked Custer's final resistance. The sounds faded as warriors overwhelmed the ridge, their numbers and terrain mastery decisive. Custer's men, trapped by the valley's folds, had no escape. The battle's chaos obscured Custer's final moments. His reliance on speed meant to seize victory, instead stretched his command beyond cohesion. The terrain, once his ally, became a cage. Sioux warriors, driven by the need to protect their village, fought with unmatched ferocity. Custer's misjudgment of their resolve, coupled with his fragmented command, sealed his fate. The valley, alive with the clash of steel and screams, swallowed his battalion. As the dust settled on Custer Ridge, the Sioux's victory reshaped the battlefield, leaving questions that would haunt survivors and historians alike. The aftermath of the Little Bighorn battle on the 25th of June, 1876, left the U.S. Army reeling. Questions swirled about George Armstrong Custer's defeat, prompting the 1879 Reno Court of Inquiry to probe Major Marcus Reno's actions. The investigation, held in Chicago, aimed to untangle the chaos, focusing on what officers saw, when, and why the 7th Cavalry collapsed. Testimonies, often conflicting, painted a fractured picture of the battle, revealing missteps, confusion, and strained relationships among Custer's commanders. Captain Frederick Benteen, a seasoned officer, emerged as a key witness. His testimony avoided direct blame, but implied Custer's decision to split the battalion was reckless. Benteen described his march to reinforce Custer, only to find Reno's men retreating under heavy Sioux fire. He prioritized aiding Reno, forming a defensive perimeter on a bluff, rather than rushing to Custer's aid. Benteen's account sidestepped condemnation, focusing on his own actions, but his tone suggested Custer's plan lacked clarity and doomed the separated units. Lieutenant Carlo DeRudio offered a vivid, if disputed, perspective. Trapped with Reno's retreating force, he claimed he saw Custer on a distant bluff, observing the valley as Sioux warriors swarmed. DeRudio's distancinally, a mile cast doubt on his clarity, but his story highlighted the disorder. He recounted panic among Reno's men, who formed a shaky skirmish line before fleeing to the timber. DeRudio himself was cut off, hiding in the brush, his testimony underscoring the breakdown of cohesion as the Sioux pressed their attack. Dr. Henry Porter, the 7th Cavalry surgeon, detailed the grim aftermath. He described tending to wounded men abandoned during Reno's chaotic retreat. Porter's account exposed the human cost of the rout, with soldiers left bleeding in the valley as Sioux warriors closed in. His testimony indirectly criticized Reno's leadership, noting the major's struggle to rally his men amid the onslaught. Reno's own actions drew intense scrutiny. Witnesses portrayed him as overwhelmed, hesitating when his battalion faced hundreds of Sioux warriors. Reno had charged the village's southern end, as Custer ordered, but halted when the enemy's numbers became clear. His skirmish line faltered, and he called a retreat to the riverbank, losing dozens in the scramble. Critics argued Reno's indecision crippled the plan, leaving Custer's flank exposed. Benteen, however, offered a measured defense, suggesting Reno faced an impossible situation due to Custer's vague instructions. The inquiry exposed a critical flaw. Communication collapsed between Custer, Reno, and Benteen. Custer's final note to Benteen, carried by Private Giovanni Martini, urged reinforcements but lacked detail on his position or intent. Reno and Benteen, miles apart, couldn't coordinate with Custer's fast-moving column. The terrain riddled with coulees and bluffs further isolated the battalions, amplifying the plan's fragility. The inquiry failed to resolve whether Reno or Benteen could have saved Custer, but it laid bare the distrust and disarray among the officers. Testimonies clashed, leaving gaps unfilled. DeRudio's sighting of Custer, Benteen's cautious march, and Reno's retreat painted a battle where no one grasped the full picture. The inquiry didn't condemn Reno outright, but revealed a deeper truth. Custer's bold strategy unraveled not just from Sioux resistance, but from his own command's fractures. The officers' accounts, tinged with self-preservation, reflected the confusion and bitterness of a defeat that shocked the nation. The inquiry's findings, though inconclusive, set the stage for debates about Custer's legacy and the Sioux's triumph. George Armstrong Custer's defeat at Little Bighorn on the 25th of June, 1876, remains a stark lesson in military tactics. His failure to scout the battlefield thoroughly, especially from the 3,411-foot ridge, left him blind to the Sioux's true strength. Custer's reliance on speed, while bold, stretched his 7th Cavalry thin, exposing them to the valley's deadly terrain. His decision to split his force into 3 battalions under Reno, Benteen, and himself lacked the simplicity needed for cohesion. Each unit, separated by rugged coulees and bluffs, operated in isolation, unable to support the others. The Sioux, unified under Sitting Bull and Crazy Horse, exploited this fracture, their coordinated attacks overwhelming Custer's scattered men. Speed was Custer's weapon, but it became his downfall. His rapid advance from 3,411 feet, without pausing to confirm the enemy's numbers, drove his men into a trap. The valley's ravines concealed hundreds of warriors, who used the terrain to flank and encircle. Custer's assumption that the Sioux would scatter underestimated their resolve to protect their village. His men, armed with single-shot Springfield carbines, couldn't match the Sioux's rapid-fire rifles and bows, loosed from cover. The division of forces amplified the chaos. Custer's orders to Reno and Benteen were vague, leaving them unsure of his position or intent. Reno's retreat under pressure and Benteen's delayed march meant Custer faced the Sioux alone. Communication broke down. Runners like Private Giovanni Martini carried desperate pleas for aid, but the distance and terrain made reinforcement impossible. The Sioux, moving as a single force, seized the initiative, their warriors weaving through coulees to cut off Custer's escape. Cohesion, the ability to fight as a unified unit, was the battle's decisive factor. Custer's split battalions lost the flow of coordinated movement, their momentum disrupted by the valley's rugged layout. The Sioux, by contrast, displayed remarkable unity. Warriors like Gall and Two Moons rallied quickly, their attacks precise and relentless. They used the terrain to their advantage, outmaneuvering Custer's men and isolating them on Custer Ridge. Archaeological evidence, bullet casings, and horsebone shows a desperate last stand, overwhelmed by sheer numbers. Custer's belief in his cavalry's superiority fueled his charge. His fear of failure, coupled with a hunger for glory, pushed him to act, despite incomplete intelligence. From 3,411 feet, he saw enough to feel confident, but not enough to grasp the Sioux's strength. The ridge, a symbol of his miscalculation, offered a fleeting chance to reassess. Instead, he pressed forward, his men following into a valley that promised victory but delivered defeat. The battle's lessons are clear. Speed without caution invites disaster, and complex plans demand simplicity to succeed. Custer's failure to balance aggression with reconnaissance cost him everything. The Sioux's victory, rooted in unity and terrain mastery, reshaped perceptions of native resistance. Little Bighorn endures as a cautionary tale, studied by tacticians and historians for its stark truths about leadership under pressure. The 3,411-foot ridge stands as a silent witness. It marks where Custer's ambition met reality, where a single view sealed his fate. The battle's legacy lives on, a reminder of the cost of hubris and the power of a determined foe. Custer's defeat at Little Bighorn left 268 soldiers dead, their bodies strewn across the valley. The Sioux's triumph, though fleeting, proved their strength. The 3,411-foot ridge, where Custer stood, symbolizes a misjudgment that reshaped history, echoing through time. Want more untold stories of the frontier? Hit subscribe and ring the bell for gripping tales of battles and bravery.